I want to talk about insulin and insulin resistance, because understanding how these work is absolutely fundamental to understanding what causes obesity. And until you understand how they work, you're not going to be able to deal with your obesity. Insulin, as you know, is a hormone that's produced by your pancreas gland. Your pancreas gland is a gland that sits at the upper part of your abdomen, quite a long way back, lies over the top of your vertebral column, and has many important functions. One of them is to produce insulin. It's produced by the beta cells of the pancreas, and is released into the bloodstream every time you have something to eat, in particular every time you eat carbohydrate. And its main function is to control the glucose that your blood glucose that inevitably will rise when you have something to eat, in particular carbohydrate. And you need to keep your blood glucose in fairly strict limits, and those are somewhere between sort of 4.4 and 6.2 millimoles per litre. If it goes underneath that, below that, then you become hypoglycemic. And realistically, the only way you can become hypoglycemic is to actually have an overdose of insulin. You will not become hypoglycemic if you don't have anything to eat. You can starve yourself for 6 weeks and you will not become hypoglycemic, because the body has a very sophisticated mechanism for making its own glucose called gluconeogenesis. And I'm going to reserve that for another video. But the sort of misconception that, you know, if you don't have anything to eat, you're going to become hypoglycemic, your blood sugar is going to fall and you're going to fall over, is complete nonsense. Equally, you don't want to let your blood glucose go too high, because then you run the risk of losing the glucose in your urine, and that of course is diabetes. And once again, I don't want to sort of talk too much about that at the moment. That's for another video. It will rise temporarily when you have a meal. It will rise temporarily up to about 7.8, but it will be brought down fairly quickly by that rise in insulin, which effectively mirrors that rise in blood glucose. That's designed to push the glucose into the billions of cells around your body that need it for their energy. That's what the cells run on. So it pushes the glucose into the cells, into your brain cells, your neurons, into your muscle cells, into your bone cells, into your gut cells, into your immune cells. The billions of cells around your body need glucose to run their systems, run their functions. If you take in too much glucose, the body has this fantastic ability to make sure that none of it is wasted. What it does, it stores it, first of all, as glycogen, and your glycogen storage is in the liver. You can store 100 grams of glycogen in your liver and about 400 grams of glycogen in your muscles, and that's effectively for immediate use when your blood glucose does drop down and you're not taking in another meal immediately. So you've got that immediate access glucose. The breakdown of glycogen, that glucose storage, is under the control of, if you like, the sort of reciprocal hormone to insulin. Insulin promotes glycogen storage, otherwise known as glycogenolysis. When you want to access that, insulin goes down to zero, and glucagon, hormone once again produced by the pancreas gland, kicks in, and that mobilizes the glucose from your glycogen. If you've reached capacity as far as your glycogen is concerned in your liver and your muscles, once again, it doesn't waste it, but what it will do is it will convert it to fat and then store it as fat. Okay, and fat, that's exactly what fat is. Your subcutaneous and your visceral fat is a storage facility. It's the sort of, if you like, the long-term storage facility that will keep you going if you haven't eaten for days on end or even weeks on end. That process of glucose being converted to excess glucose being converted to fat and being stored as fat is under the control of insulin. So insulin promotes that. Glucagon will stop that, but insulin will promote it. Now, if you force your body to produce too much insulin, you will develop a condition called insulin resistance. And effectively, insulin resistance is where you're producing so much insulin that the cells are saying, I can't take any more, and will put up, if you like, a little bit of a roadblock. Okay? And what that does is that's stopping the glucose then going into your cells. Okay? So your metabolism will fall. All of the cells that are in your body will suddenly lose the ability to take in maximal amounts of glucose, and the metabolism will fall. As I said, it won't waste any of the glucose. What it does do, it converts it to fat. So if the glucose can't get into your cells because of insulin resistance, it will promote fat storage. It promotes obesity. So insulin resistance actually promotes obesity. That's the underlying problem. Bizarrely, a lot of my colleagues, most doctors and people in the business of nutrition, believe that insulin resistance is a disease entity. And I guess that's come around because it is the one thing that is constant in diabetics. You see insulin resistance in all type 2 diabetics. So I guess it's only natural that most people believe that it's part of a disease entity. I believe that it's actually normal. Insulin resistance is normal, and I believe it is a homeostatic mechanism, i.e. a control mechanism that has evolved with the rest of the body over 150,000 years, and even further back, if you think that we have descended from more primitive animals, which of course we have. But that mechanism has evolved to ensure that we preserve our stored energy. So if you're in the fed state, you have lots of insulin, you've developed insulin resistance. Then what you need to do, what primitive man needed to do, of course, was to conserve his energy stores. And that's exactly what insulin resistance does. You have to remember, I suppose, that primitive man didn't really have much to do beyond finding food for himself. That's why he was a hunter-gatherer. He spent most of the day doing that, and then he came home at night or in the evening, and he sat down with his family and they ate whatever he had hunted for and gathered. He certainly didn't have the school run to do. He didn't have a job to go to. He didn't have a holiday to go on. He didn't need to catch up with friends necessarily. He just basically sat in his cave with his family. So it was very important that he actually had to conserve his energy. And that's exactly what insulin resistance does. When the food runs out, insulin resistance, so he's not producing any insulin now, insulin resistance drops. The fat that has been stored whilst he's been in the fed state is now mobilized by glucagon and some other hormones, in particular adrenaline. And that then allowed him to utilize his stored fat as his energy source, which all of your cells can do. They can switch between glucose and fatty acids, which is the end product of lipolysis, which is the breakdown of stored fat, with one exception, and that is the central nervous system, that is your brain and your spinal cord. That has an obligatory requirement for glucose. It cannot use fatty acids. It can, however, use ketone bodies. Now, ketone bodies is something that is generated by your liver after about 3 days of starvation. And I don't want to talk any further about ketone bodies now and about ketosis. Once again, there's a great deal of misinformation and misunderstanding about ketosis and the so-called ketogenic diet, and how that should be your ultimate aim. It absolutely shouldn't. Okay, it's not necessary because it implies that you've been starving yourself for more than about 3 days. Okay, the glucose or rather the brain, gets its glucose, if the food is running short, gets its glucose from gluconeogenesis, as I've already said. So that's how insulin operates with regards to controlling blood glucose, pushing it into the cells, putting a brake on it to conserve the energy, converting the excess to fat and storing it as fat, and then allowing the fat to be mobilized once the glucose starts to fall. Insulin blocks blocks lipolysis, the breakdown of fat into fatty acids. Okay, so if you are constantly feeding your body with food, in particular carbohydrate, and in particular refined carbohydrate, and your insulin is always up here, because what's supposed to happen is once it has pushed the glucose into your cells, your insulin levels then fall back to zero. If your insulin is always up at this level here, because you are constantly feeding your body, then lipolysis will never happen. And that's why your obesity will never disappear. So whatever method you are choosing to use to deal with your obesity, if it doesn't specifically target insulin resistance, it will fail. And that explains why pretty much all of the methods that are out there to control obesity and deal with obesity, be that the calorie restricted diet, exercise is extremely important, but you will not exercise the weight off, and once again I'm going to leave that for another video. Surgery, injections, potions, pills, injection, any of those things, okay, unless they specifically target insulin resistance, it isn't going to work. And as far as I'm concerned, there is only one thing that will work, and that is the one thing that will make sure that your insulin is down at zero for a significant part of the day, and that of course means you do not eat for a significant part of the day, and that equates to intermittent fasting. And that is why intermittent fasting is an essential part of the Nestea formula. The Nestea formula I'm going to talk about in another video. It's three things: intermittent fasting, cardiovascular exercise, and Mediterranean type cuisine. The key element is intermittent fasting, where you do all of your eating in 6 hours, and you fast for 18 hours a day. And the easiest thing to do by far is to skip breakfast. And it will work. In fact, as far as I can see, it is the only thing that will work.